He spat in the young guard's face. Right in his face in front of 50 people because the guard wouldn't move for his photograph. And the guard, soaked with a stranger's spit, humiliated in front of a crowd, did not so much as blink. But the crowd did. And what the crowd did next in the minutes that followed is the reason I'm telling you this story. Because the rich man who spat thought he'd won. He thought money and arrogance had once again gotten him whatever he wanted. He had no idea that he'd just made the single worst mistake of his trip, and that the disciplined silence of the man he just spat on was about to cost him far more than a photograph. Let me tell it from the start, because the spit isn't really the story. What came after is. My name is Dario. I was a street vendor near one of the royal sites for years. I ran a little coffee and pastry cart on the corner, the kind of cart that becomes a fixture that the regulars nod to and the tourists line up at on cold mornings, which means I had every single day a front row seat to the great theater of that place. The crowds, the guards, the endless small dramas that play out in front of those famous railings. I've seen everything from that cart. Marriage proposals, fainting tourists, lost children reunited with frantic parents, and once, the thing I'm about to tell you, which I've never forgotten. I want to tell you about the guard first because he matters. I didn't know his name then. I'll call him the young guardsman because that's how I think of him. He was young, like most of them are, but there was a particular quality to him that I'd noticed over the weeks he'd been on that post. A gentleness under the discipline. You see a lot of guards from a cart like mine and they're all disciplined, all still, but some of them have a hardness to them, a kind of cold remove, and some of them have something softer underneath the stillness, something kind. This one was the kind one. I'd see him, in the small ways you can see such things, being gentle with the children who came to gawp at him, never breaking his stillness, but somehow, with just his eyes, being warm to them. The little ones loved him. I'd watched him, more than once, hold himself perfectly still while some tiny child stood inches away staring up in wonder. And you could see, in the very corner of his eye, that he was being kind to them even while he gave them nothing. So when I tell you what the rich man did to him, I want you to picture that man on the receiving end of it. Not a faceless soldier. A gentle young man who was kind to children, standing at his post, doing his job. It was a cold, bright winter morning. Hard frost on everything, the breath of the crowd hanging in clouds, the low sun throwing long blue shadows across the pavement. My cart was busy, cold mornings are good for coffee, and there was the usual thick crowd gathered at the railings, several deep, all the phones up, everyone doing the things tourists do. And then the rich man arrived. You could tell instantly what kind of person he was. Everything about him announced money, the watch, the coat, the particular way he moved through the crowd as if it should part for him, as if the other people were obstacles rather than human beings. He had a couple of companions with him, hangers-on of the kind that wealthy, unpleasant people collect, and he was loud. And he was entitled, and he had clearly decided that this morning, this place, these people, all existed primarily for his entertainment. I disliked him on sight, I'll be honest. From behind my cart I watched him shoulder his way to the front of the crowd, near the young guardsman, pushing past people who'd been waiting, ignoring the irritated looks, supremely indifferent to anyone but himself. And I had the same thought I'd had about another troublemaker once, a thought I've learned to trust. That man is going to do something ugly. He wanted a photograph. Of course he did, but not just a photograph beside the guard the way everyone takes. He wanted something more. He wanted the guard to pose with him, to acknowledge him, to do something, give a thumbs up, turn toward the camera, smile, I don't know what exactly, but something that would prove to the man, and to whoever he planned to show the photo to, that he was special. That even the famous still guard had moved for him. And the guard, of course, gave him nothing, stood like stone, eyes forward, because that's the job, and the job doesn't bend for money or for arrogance or for anyone. I watched the rich man's irritation build. He wasn't used to being given nothing. He started issuing instructions to the guard. Turn this way, look at the camera, come on, just one, the commands of a man accustomed to being obeyed, growing more annoyed with each one that went unanswered. His companions were laughing, egging him on. And the guard stood there motionless, giving this entitled man exactly what he gave everyone, which was nothing, which was the whole point. And being given nothing, being in his own mind, ignored by someone he considered beneath him, was, for a man like that, intolerable. I watched his irritation curdle into something nastier, into the particular fury of a powerful person who has discovered that there's something his money can't buy and his status can't command. The young guardsman, simply by doing his job, had found the one thing that man couldn't stand: indifference, and the man could not let it go. It escalated the way these things do. The man got louder, more aggressive. He started insulting the guard, calling him names, mocking him, the cheap cruelty of a bully who's found a target that can't fight back. What's wrong with you? Are you stupid? Are you deaf? Do you think you're better than me? You're nothing. You're a toy soldier. You're paid to stand there and you can't even do me one favor. On and on. The crowd had gone quiet around it now, that uncomfortable quiet of people watching someone behave badly and not knowing what to do. A few people filmed it. Most just watched, embarrassed and appalled. And the guard took it, all of it. Stood there, motionless, absorbing the stream of abuse without a flicker, the way they're trained to, the way the dignity of the post demands. Which, of course, only enraged the man further, because nothing infuriates a bully like a target who won't be provoked. Every insult that bounced off the guard's stillness wound the man tighter, made him more desperate to get a reaction, any reaction, to crack that maddening, dignified, indifferent surface. And finally, when the insults didn't work, when nothing he said could make the young man so much as blink, the rich man did the unforgivable thing. He stepped in close, his face twisted with that ugly, entitled fury, and he spat, full in the young guardsman's face. The gasp went through the crowd like a wave, a real, horrified, collective sound, because everyone understood instantly that a line had been crossed, that this wasn't rudeness anymore, wasn't even just abuse, but something genuinely vile, an assault, a degradation, one human being spitting in another human being's face. People cried out, someone said, "Oh my God," the whole crowd recoiled. And the young guardsman, soaked now with a stranger's spit running down his cheek, humiliated in the most personal and disgusting way possible in front of 50 people, did not move, did not flinch, did not wipe his face, did not break his stare, did not give that vile man the single thing he so desperately wanted, which was a reaction. He simply stood there at his post, with another man spit on his face, and held his dignity so completely, so absolutely, that it was almost unbearable to watch. The rich man smirked. He actually smirked. He turned to his companions, pleased with himself, as if he'd won, as if degrading a young man who couldn't fight back was some kind of victory. He thought it was over. He thought he'd gotten away with it, the way he'd gotten away with everything his whole life. He thought the disciplined silence of the guard meant nothing would happen. He was about to find out how wrong he was, because the guard's discipline wasn't weakness, and it wasn't the end of it. It was just the beginning. And the thing that happened next, that started, quietly in the crowd, in the seconds after that smirk, is the rest of the story. For a moment after the smirk, nothing happened. The rich man stood there, pleased with himself. The guard stood there, spit on his face, motionless. The crowd stood there, frozen in shock. And then the crowd turned. Not violently, that's not what I mean. I mean that something shifted in 50 people all at once, a current that ran through the whole gathering, and it was the most remarkable thing to watch from behind my cart, because up to that moment the crowd had been passive, watching, embarrassed, unsure what to do, the way crowds are when someone behaves badly, that bystander paralysis where everyone waits for someone else to act. The man had been counting on that paralysis. Bullies always do. They count on the fact that people watch and don't act. But the spit broke the paralysis. The spit was too much. It crossed a line so clear and so vile that it jolted the whole crowd out of its passivity all at once and turned the embarrassed silence into something else entirely. Anger. Collective, righteous anger. You could feel it gather in the air like a charge before a storm. It started with one voice, an older woman near the front who had watched the whole thing. She said loudly, clearly into the shocked silence, "How dare you? How dare you do that to him?" And that one voice broke the dam, because the moment one person spoke, the permission spread, and suddenly the whole crowd found its voice at once. People started shouting at the man. Not a mob, there was no violence in it, no one touched him, but a wall of 50 people's outrage all turned on him at once. "Shame on you. That's disgusting. He can't even defend himself, you coward. Apologize. You should be ashamed." The man who, seconds before, had felt like the most powerful person in the courtyard, was suddenly surrounded by a crowd of furious strangers, every one of them disgusted with him, every one of them on the side of the silent young guard he'd just degraded. And the man's smirk faltered. You could see it go, because this wasn't the script he knew. In his world, money and status protected you, smoothed everything over, made consequences disappear. He'd spat on a man who couldn't fight back precisely because he thought there'd be no consequences. The guard couldn't react, and the crowd would just watch, and he'd walk away having gotten his cruel little thrill. But the crowd was not just watching. The crowd had turned, and the crowd was loud, and the crowd was unanimous. And there were phones, so many phones, all pointed at him now, recording, capturing his face, his identity, the whole vile thing he'd done. The consequences he'd assumed would never come were arriving all at once, from a direction he hadn't even considered. Not from the guard, from everyone else. And here is where it became something more than just a crowd shouting, because the people in that crowd didn't just yell and then let it go. They acted. Several people had filmed the entire thing, the abuse, the insults, and the spit itself, clear and undeniable. And those people in the minutes that followed did exactly what you'd hope. They didn't just post it for clicks and move on. They came forward. Because spitting in someone's face is not just rude, it's an assault, a real one, a crime. And there were security and police presence around that site, as there always is, and the disturbance had drawn them. And as the officials arrived to deal with the commotion, the crowd did something collective and beautiful. They made absolutely certain that this man did not simply walk away. They surrounded the moment with witnesses. Person after person stepped forward to say, "I saw it, I'll give a statement, here's my video, I'll testify to exactly what happened." The older woman who'd spoken first. A young couple who'd filmed it. A father who'd been there with his kids. Tourists from 3 different countries, all united in their disgust, all willing to put their names to what they'd seen. The man who'd assumed there'd be no consequences suddenly found himself facing a crowd of 50 people, every single one of whom was prepared to make sure there were. He tried, of course, to do what men like that always do, to bluster, to threaten, to invoke his money, his status, his lawyers, his importance. "Do you know who I am? You can't do this. I'll have you all dealt with." The same energy that had demanded the photograph. But it didn't work because it doesn't work against a crowd that has decided it has had enough. His money meant nothing to 50 disgusted strangers. His status meant nothing. His threats just made it worse, made the crowd angrier, made more people step forward. The very arrogance that had made him think he was untouchable was now, in front of everyone, being revealed as exactly the hollow thing it was. The guard, through all of this, never moved. That's the thing I keep coming back to. While the crowd turned, while the shouting rose, while the man's world came apart around him, the young guardsman simply held his post, still soaked with spit, still silent, still dignified. He never said a word, never acknowledged the chaos, never showed the slightest flicker of the vindication he must have felt. He just stood there, holding the line, being exactly what he was supposed to be. And that, I realized, watching it, was the most powerful thing of all, because the contrast could not have been starker. On one side, the rich man, loud, threatening, flailing, his arrogance curdling into panic as the consequences closed in. On the other side, the young guardsman, silent, still, dignified, having absorbed the worst that man could do and refused to be diminished by it. And the crowd saw that contrast, felt it. The man had tried to humiliate the guard, and instead, by his own vileness, he had only made the guard's dignity shine brighter and revealed his own ugliness for all to see. The guard's stillness had become a mirror, and the man could not stand what it showed. The spit was meant to degrade the guard. Instead, it degraded only the man who spat. The guard's refusal to react had taken the man's cruelty and reflected it straight back onto its source. He tried to drag the young soldier down to his level, and the young soldier had simply refused to come, and so the man had ended up down there alone, exposed, in front of everyone. The officials took the man in hand. I won't dramatize the mechanics of it. I'm a coffee vendor, not a policeman, and I didn't see every detail. But I saw enough to know that he was not walking away from this. The witnesses, the video, the sheer undeniable clarity of what he'd done, it was all there. He was led away, still blustering, still threatening, but smaller now, diminished, the arrogance leaking out of him as the reality set in that for once in his charmed life, there were going to be consequences he couldn't buy his way out of. And as he was led off, something happened that I'll never forget. The crowd, this crowd of 50 strangers who just turned into a wall of righteous anger, turned all together to the young guardsman, and they began to applaud. Not for anything he'd done exactly. He just stood there. That was the whole point. They applauded him for standing there, for the dignity of it, for absorbing that vile assault without being diminished by it, for showing them all without a word what real strength looks like next to the hollow bullying of a man who mistook cruelty for power. The applause swelled and people cheered, and the young guardsman stood there in the cold, bright morning, still silent, still motionless, spit drying on his face, while 50 strangers told him, the only way they could, that they had seen what he was and what the other man wasn't. And I stood behind my cart, and I'm not ashamed to say my eyes were stinging, and I put my own hands together and applauded too. But the story wasn't quite over, because there was one more thing, something that happened after the man was gone and the crowd began to settle, that turned the whole morning from a story about a bully getting his comeuppance into something gentler and better. And it involved a small child and the young guardsman, and a single moment that I think about whenever I remember that cold, bright day. That's the last part of the story. After the man was gone, the crowd began to settle, the way a crowd does after a storm passes through it. The adrenaline draining, people turning to each other, shaking their heads, processing what they'd just seen. The young guardsman still stood his post. He would have to wait, I knew, for his relief, for the proper moment before he could clean his face or step away. Discipline doesn't bend even for that. So he stood there, with the dried evidence of the man's cruelty still on his cheek, holding the line. And it was then that the small child came. She couldn't have been more than 5 or 6. She'd been in the crowd with her parents, had seen the whole thing, or seen enough of it, enough to understand that a bad man had hurt the nice soldier, in the simple, clear moral vision that small children have. And now, as the crowd settled, she slipped free of her parents' hands and walked, on her small, determined legs, right up to the young guardsman. The crowd went quiet again, watching. Her parents started forward, anxious, but something made them stop and let her go. And the little girl stood in front of the young guardsman, and she looked up at him, way up, at this tall soldier in his uniform, and she reached up on her tiptoes, as high as she could reach. And in her small hand was a tissue, a crumpled little tissue from her pocket, the kind a parent always tucks into a small child's coat. She couldn't reach his face, of course. She was far too small, but she stretched up as high as she could go, holding out the tissue, trying to give it to him, trying to help him wipe away the bad man's spit. Trying, in the only way a 5-year-old can, to undo the cruelty she'd just watched, to make it better. I have seen a lot of things from behind that cart. I have never seen anything like what happened next. Because the young guardsman, who had not moved, not flinched, not reacted through the entire ordeal, who had absorbed insults and abuse and a stranger's spit without breaking his post for a single instant. That young guardsman looked down at the tiny child reaching up to him with her crumpled tissue. And he broke his post. He bent down. Slowly, with great gentleness, this tall soldier folded himself down to her level, down on one knee in front of her so that she could reach. And the little girl, with the fierce concentration of a child doing something important, reached out with her tissue and gently, carefully, wiped the young man's cheek, wiped away the spit. Cleaned his face, this 5-year-old, with her little crumpled tissue, frowning with the effort of getting it right. And the young guardsman let her, knelt there and let a small child clean his face. And when she'd finished, when she'd wiped away the last of the cruelty the rich man had left on him, the guardsman did something that broke the whole crowd. He looked at her, this gentle young man who was kind to children, and he gave her a small, soft smile. The first expression any of us had seen on his face that whole morning, a smile just for her. And he said something to her quietly that I was too far away to hear, but that made her beam, made her whole small face light up like the sun. And then he stood back up, squared up, resumed his post. Became a statue again, silent and still, his face clean now, the cruelty wiped away by a child. And the little girl ran back to her parents, glowing with pride, and the crowd, for the second time that morning, burst into applause. But this applause was different. The first applause had been anger and vindication. This applause was something gentler. It was love. It was 50 strangers watching a small child undo a cruel man's ugliness with a crumpled tissue and a young soldier's gentleness, and being moved beyond words by it. I've thought about that morning for years, about all of it, the rich man and the spit and the crowd turning, and most of all the little girl with her tissue. And I've come to understand it as a story about two completely different kinds of power, and which one actually wins in the end. The rich man believed in one kind of power, the power of money, of status, of being able to do what you want to people who can't stop you. He spat in a young man's face because he believed that kind of power made him untouchable, that he could degrade someone weaker and walk away clean because that's what his kind of power had always let him do. And he was wrong. His power turned out to be hollow. The moment the crowd turned, his money meant nothing, his status meant nothing, his threats meant nothing. The kind of power he'd spent his life relying on evaporated the instant it met 50 ordinary people who'd had enough. And the young guardsman and the little girl showed a completely different kind of power. The guard's power was in his dignity, in his refusal to be diminished, in his discipline, in the way he absorbed the worst that cruelty could do and simply would not let it make him cruel in return. And the little girl's power was the simplest and greatest of all, the power of plain human kindness. She watched a bad thing happen, and instead of being a bystander, she did the one small thing she could to make it better. She couldn't undo the assault. She couldn't punish the man. But she could wipe a soldier's face with a tissue and tell him without words that was wrong, and I'm sorry it happened to you, and I want to make it better. And that small kindness turned out to be more powerful than all the rich man's money. It was the thing the whole crowd remembered. It was the thing that made grown adults cry. It was the thing that won. The rich man, I heard later, did face real consequences. The video was clear, the witnesses were many, and spitting in someone's face is a genuine assault that the law takes seriously. I won't pretend to know every detail of what happened to him, but I know he did not walk away clean, the way he'd assumed he would. The man who thought there'd be no consequences found that, for once, there were. And I'd like to think, though I'll never know, that somewhere in all of it, he had to sit with the image of what he'd done. A grown man with everything spitting in the face of a young soldier who was kind to children, and a 5-year-old undoing his cruelty with a tissue. I'd like to think that image followed him. I hope it did. The young guardsman I never spoke to. We weren't in worlds that spoke, but I served him coffee in a manner of speaking for months afterward, by which I mean I watched him on that post day after day, and every time I saw him I thought of that morning, and every time I felt a kind of quiet respect that I've rarely felt for anyone. He never knew I'd witnessed it the way I had. He never knew how much it had moved me. He just went on standing his post, being kind to the children in the small ways he could, being gentle under the discipline, being exactly the same young man the morning after as he'd been the morning of, which was the whole point. The cruelty hadn't changed him. He'd refused to let it. That was his victory, and it was total. People want this to be a story about a rich jerk getting what he deserved. And it is. A little. There's a satisfaction in watching the crowd turn, in watching the consequences arrive, and I won't pretend that satisfaction isn't part of why I've told it. But that's not what it's really about. To me, it's about the little girl with the tissue. Because the crowd turning on the man, that was justice, and justice matters. But justice is a response to cruelty. It lives in cruelty's shadow. The little girl was something else. She wasn't responding to the man at all. She was responding to the guard. She wasn't interested in punishing the bad. She was interested in healing the hurt. And that's the higher thing. That's the thing that actually undoes cruelty rather than just answering it. The crowd's anger made the man pay. The child's kindness made the guard whole. And of the two, it's the kindness I remember. It's the kindness that mattered. A rich man spat in a young soldier's face, believing his money made him untouchable. And a 5-year-old wiped it away with a crumpled tissue, and proved that the smallest kindness in the world is more powerful than all the arrogance money can buy. The man left having learned that his power was hollow. The crowd left having remembered what real strength looks like. And I stood behind my cart in the cold, bright morning, watching a young soldier kneel for a small child, and I learned the thing I've carried ever since. Cruelty is loud and it thinks it wins, but it doesn't. In the end, it's always the quiet kindness, the tissue, the gentleness, the small good thing done by someone who didn't have to, that's left standing when the noise dies down. The man with everything spat and was forgotten. The child with a tissue wiped a soldier's face, and I'll remember it until the day I die. That's the whole story, and it's the best thing I ever saw from behind that cart.